While on the Tyrrhenian side of Calabria, the families were killing each other, Giuseppe Morabito was silently planning to take over the entire region and beyond. After establishing contacts with the Sicilian mafia for a stable supply of heroin and establishing an important friendship with Salvatore Riina, Giuseppe Morabito understood that 'Ndrangheta needed an upgrade in terms of structure. But unlike the Sicilian mafia, where the commission was the main board of directors of the organisation, 'Ndrangheta didn't have a similar organism. Therefore, Morabito decided to push for such a change, arguing that such a commission could have prevented further wars amongst the families. Momo Piromali and Paolo De Stefano agreed to establish the Santa, which, once implemented, was the highest authority of 'Ndrangheta, and only the 7 highest ranked bosses could be part of it. Despite being a democratic commission, the influence of Giuseppe Morabito within the Santa was absolute, and despite it never having been officially confirmed, Morabito was acting as a sort of chairman. As much as Salvatore Riina was controlling directly and indirectly the whole of Sicily, Giuseppe Morabito was doing the same but in Calabria. And as we mentioned before, with an amendment to his structure. 'Ndrangheta was different compared to the past. Now, 'Ndrangheta is much more organised, much more powerful, and controlled by a man smart enough to foresee the future and predict trends and moves. In other words, 'Ndrangheta was no longer a puzzle of confused families running tobacco smuggling or extorting small local businesses. 'Ndrangheta was now a coordinated, brand new army, ready to be deployed in the battlefield and with a bright future ahead. A true crime empire. In addition, the Santa has a special peculiarity which theoretically was in conflict with the rules of 'Ndrangheta. Whoever was a part of Santa could directly or indirectly approach the official institutions and also politicians, judges and military officials. Finally, 'Ndrangheta was in a position to operate like the Sicilian mafia, and then commence to move pawns within the regional and central government of Italy. Let's pause our story again for a second so that we can better understand the environment of the criminal organisations in Italy and overseas, since the 1970s were so crucial and they were the period of evolution for the entire worldwide crime syndicates. We have the Sicilian mafia, which is about to be taken over by Salvatore Riina and his Corleonesi family. In Naples, the Camorra is still relatively rudimentary, but a new key player. Raffaele Cutoli is about to try to impose himself, but this is material for a future video. But in the United States and Canada, new families which escaped from Sicily have just arrived and ready to set up their new crime syndicates in New York, Montreal, Miami and so on. In South America, a young Pablo Escobar is also planning to make his moves, establishing the Medellin cartel, knowing that cocaine will be the true business of the future. And how about our new friend Giuseppe Morabito, ou Tiradritto? He understood that 'Ndrangheta was still too young and too poor to compete at that level. He needed to be patient and create enough cash liquidity to approach new drug suppliers and new markets. But in doing so, Morabito was aware that he could step on the turf of his new Corleonesi friends. Morabito understood that there was another highly lucrative business which was not controlled by the Sicilian mafia: kidnappings. Arguably one of the most evil and infamous crimes, kidnappings for ransom became the main income for 'ndrine, which were terrorising the rest of the high class of Italy. The Sicilian mafia and Camorra have never wanted to enter into this industry of kidnapping since it was considered a dishonourable activity. But unlike the Sicilian mafia, the 'Ndrangheta doesn't have an honourable code of conduct. With a peak in the late 1970s, the kidnapping rate in Italy was on the rise year after year, with some of the most gruesome and brutal episodes in the history of 'Ndrangheta. Kids, women, old men, nobody was spared the ferocity of 'Ndrangheta in those years, and the captivity could last several months in horrible conditions. They were mostly held in a specific region of Calabria called Aspromonte, a region that's very hard to get through because of the wilderness and mountainous landscape, and also because of the pervasive control of 'Ndrangheta. It's a surreal place because even if everyone knew the kidnapped people were in a specific place, it was virtually impossible to get there and find them. They'd get moved to other locations as soon as the police happened to get anywhere near close. However, the situation collapsed when the Italian government decided to adopt countermeasures to prevent those crimes. Families whose relatives had been kidnapped saw their assets frozen to prevent them from paying a ransom. But this only caused a more brutal reaction of 'Ndrangheta bosses, who started to mutilate the victims in order to exercise pressure on the families to pay the relevant ransoms. One of the most famous kidnapping cases occurred in 1973 when John Paul Getty III, the grandson of the billionaire J. Paul Getty, was kidnapped in Rome and brought to Calabria for ransom. And we do suggest you watch the movie All the Money in the World to understand in detail that whole story. However, if this was the most famous case for the fact it involved a well-known family, other kidnappings got the attention of the world for their sheer brutality. Several people, in fact, died during the captivity. Another case that shocked Italy and beyond was the kidnapping of an Italian engineer who, after months of starvation, was so thin that he managed to escape through his own handcuffs. He ran to a small village to ask for help, but the people there, instead of calling the police, contacted the very family which had abducted him in the first place. But this is a typical example of how 'Ndrangheta managed to terrorise people living in the territory that they controlled. The trend of this infamous crime slowed down in the middle of the 1980s, and suddenly, from the peak of 1977, the kidnapping rate went down to just a few cases per year. The main families of 'Ndrangheta realised that the liquidity accrued over those years from the ransoms was then enough to convert the main businesses to cocaine smuggling and real estate speculation. On top of this, the big families in Calabria started to boycott those families which were still involved in the kidnappings business, as the amount of police along the main roads in Calabria was growing so much because of the investigations and, of course, the search for missing people. According to data of the Italian Anti-Mafia Commission, in just over a decade, the families of 'Ndrangheta active in kidnappings managed to pocket more than $380 million. Finally, 'Ndrangheta's transformation was almost complete and ready to follow the path of the Sicilian Mafia. Liquidity was ready to be invested in real estate and cocaine. Political connections were successfully established, but then, suddenly, something happened. Once again, a war amongst the families of the Tyrrhenian area of Calabria broke out. Specifically, the families involved were those of Reggio Calabria, and the Second 'Ndrangheta War started for more territorial reasons and conflict of power. In fact, an Imerti relative married a relative of the Condello family, creating a very powerful union between two already influential families in 1983. This newly created superfamily would have been by far the most powerful clan of Reggio Calabria, and the De Stefano clan was about to lose the leadership of Reggio Calabria. Paolo Di Stefano couldn't afford to see another family in Reggio Calabria becoming stronger than his own family, and so he needed to make sure that the influence of the Imerti Condello family would be stopped for good. As a result, in October 1985, a year and a half after the Imerti Condello marriage, the De Stefano's killers received the orders to place a bomb under the car of Antonio Imerti, nicknamed the Fierce Dwarf and boss of the Imerti family. By pure luck or bad luck, depending on where you stood in this war, the car bomb exploded, killing all of Antonio Imerti's bodyguards, except for the boss. The response was brutal, and the Fierce Dwarf, knowing who was behind his attempted assassination, deployed all his available firepower to smash the De Stefano family. Revenge arrived 2 days after the unsuccessful attack on the Imerti family boss, and this time the Condello family retaliated without missing the target. Only 48 hours later, Paolo Di Stefano, boss of the De Stefano 'Ndrina, is killed in the heart of his empire. This was a massive blow for one of the most powerful families of Reggio Calabria, and the only way to survive was to find a powerful ally. 2 months after the death of Paolo Di Stefano, the younger brother Orazio married a Tegano relative, sealing and creating a new family with enough firepower to stand against the Imerti Condello family. The conflict went on, with losses from both sides, and Reggio Calabria became a battlefield. The war lasted for 6 long years, and according to prevailing sources, in 1991 the Sicilian mafia finally managed to broker a ceasefire and bring peace amongst the two families and their respective allies. No winner was declared, and in this second 'Ndrangheta war, more than 1,000 men lost their lives. Alongside the peace, the Sicilian mafia imposed on the 'Ndrangheta to adopt the Provincia, which is a further organ on top of Santa, composed of only 3 members, one from Reggio Calabria, one from Gioia Tauro, and one from Africo Locride. According to various turncoats or pentiti, Leoluca Bagarella, acting on behalf of Sicilian mafia, was the man that brokered the peace in Calabria, and upon the order of Salvatore Rina, Giuseppe Morabito was subsequently appointed as the leading figure of the Santa. In other words, Morabito, without firing a single bullet, became the head of 'Ndrangheta, as several turncoats described afterwards. Let's highlight some key points before concluding our story. Now, despite the second 'Ndrangheta war slowing down the growth of 'Ndrangheta, according to many criminologists and historians, it was a fundamental event to shape what 'Ndrangheta is today. The Provincia was a very powerful innovation for a very rudimentary organisation. Historically, both in Italy and in South America, crime syndicates have always been anarchic to some extent. In other words, apart from having a set of rules which can't be breached for whatever reason, all families enjoyed a certain degree of freedom as long as they didn't step on each other's turf. Now, arguably, this may not have been a winning model, since you could say the assets are not properly and effectively deployed, and the crime syndicate efforts aren't actually maximised. And recently, this sort of anarchic model changed in the world crime syndicates, where the presence of a higher authority became fundamental for the success of the entire organisation. And just to give you an example, under the orders of Salvatore Rina, the incomes of the Sicilian mafia increased extraordinarily, since there was a boss of bosses giving orders to a vast majority of families. It was rather like a CEO for a company coordinating each department. And then, of course, those who had the pleasure of watching our videos on the Sicilian mafia will know how that story ended. But this issue was mainly due to the brutality and, of course, the massacre of Corleonesi clan. In Colombia, Pablo Escobar achieved a very similar result. He was the king of cocaine, and having him as a boss maximised the production and the distribution. The counterproof is the Camorra, which is by far the most anarchic and less coordinated crime syndicate. And due to these limitations, the Camorra has never quite projected the same sort of international power. Therefore, the Provincia brought a terrific tool to 'Ndrangheta: coordination. Once the conflicts arising from the second 'Ndrangheta war were settled, the crime syndicate became unstoppable. For the sake of information, we must also take into consideration that the Sicilian mafia empire was already under loads of pressure. In 1992, Salvatore Rina decided to kill the 2 most preeminent anti-mafia judges of Italy, triggering an unprecedented response from the government. In 1993, Salvatore Rina ended up behind bars for good, and given the final firm approach of the Italian institutions to tackle the mafia, the other bosses were no longer free anymore to conduct business as usual. So, a large portion of the business left behind by the mafia had been taken over by 'Ndrangheta. And in this landscape, 'Ndrangheta, under the solid leadership of Giuseppe Morabito, managed to grow bigger and bigger, more so than any other crime syndicate in Italy. The first step of 'Ndrangheta in the 90s was to approach the drug suppliers in South America directly, cutting out the intermediaries. In just 5 years after the second 'Ndrangheta war, the Morabito clan was acting as guarantor for several other families of 'Ndrangheta, which in exchange pledged full loyalty to the old boss. Another innovation brought about by 'Ndrangheta in the operation of drug distribution was to move their men overseas, and that was due to the internal rules of 'Ndrangheta itself. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, becoming part of 'Ndrangheta is extremely hard if you're not born within. And so the families needed to move their own people to different countries when they wanted to expand. And over the years, this has created one of the largest and most capillary types of networks any crime syndicate has ever had in the world. Unlike Colombian or Mexican cartels, where at most they move the men to the borders of the United States, Ndrangheta has strong affiliated families in Germany, Spain, France, the Netherlands, United Kingdom and Australia. And according to unreliable sources, Ndrangheta tried even to finance small players in South America in order to commence cocaine production in Peru and Bolivia. Now, this is a level that no other crime syndicate has ever even thought to implement. Now, another point illustrating how advanced Ndrangheta is nowadays is its modus operandi. When was the last time you heard about somebody being killed by Ndrangheta? Under the leadership of Salvatore Riina, it was a massacre. The Camorra filled newspapers every week with homicides in Naples, not to mention what was going on in South America or Russia. Ndrangheta does not. You hardly ever hear about them. And this was the lesson from Giuseppe Morabito. And it's very simple to tell, but it is the truth. Ndrangheta doesn't shoot, except in very rare cases. Breaking legs or threatening relatives is much more effective, since Ndrangheta knows how to reach its goals without triggering the attention of the authorities and the police. It's what's going on nowadays, and it's what the turncoats are telling the police. A man approaching you with a photo of your daughter is 100% more effective than any other threat, especially because you know what these people are capable of and have done so in the 1980s. Another anomaly that the investigators are having to deal with is the close relationship between the Ndrangheta and the top-notch levels of Freemasonry, which is mainly composed of politicians, judges, lawyers, bankers and so on. Unfortunately, most of the documents proving the correlation between crime syndicates and other branches of the Italian institutions, and often not only Italians but also in several other countries, unsurprisingly are still very hard to retrieve. And only part of the depositions of the turncoats are or have been made available. However, there is an incredible example in the political landscape of Italy to give you an idea of just how related those two worlds are. When the main parties of Italy had been devastated by the corruption scandal in 1992, Silvio Berlusconi appointed a long-term friend, Marcello Dell'Utri, with the task of establishing Forza Italia, the party who dominated the political landscape of Italy for over 15 years. According to several turncoats, Dell'Utri asked the permission from Ndrangheta to proceed to establish such a political party. Now, it's still unknown whether Silvio Berlusconi was aware of such a move or not. But Giuseppe Morabito was captured in 2004. But the news stayed on TV and newspapers for only a couple of days, because very few people were aware of who this man was and his history. And in terms of comparison, when Salvatore Riina was arrested in 1993, all the major TV networks interrupted movies, sports events and other programs to deliver the news. For weeks his capture was all over the TV and media. But today, unlike the name of Salvatore Riina, Morabito is almost unknown in Italy, and likely to many of you watching the video. And do let us know if you have indeed heard of him before in the comments below. But there is a detail which can give an idea as to just who Giuseppe Morabito was. The Anti-Mafia Commission commented that the capture of Morabito was the biggest achievement of the Italian police in history, and securing Morabito to justice was just like capturing Salvatore Riina 5 times over. As mentioned before, Ndrangheta achieved a position unheard of and unseen before for a crime syndicate. And it's not only a matter of how much money they make, how strong their firepower is. Those are 1970s, 1980s types of questions. What Ndrangheta is nowadays goes beyond the money that they make and how many guns they have. It's the sophistication reached over the years, which is just insane. In July 2020, the Financial Times announced that Ndrangheta had issued bonds for a $1 billion amount in London, with the assistance of world-famous advisors and multinationals. Since 2000, every month investigators in Italy, Germany and many other countries come across billions of investments placed by Ndrangheta in at least 5 stock exchanges, including London, New York and Frankfurt. In other words, Ndrangheta is buying 3%, 7%, 10% of shares of blue chip companies under our very eyes in broad daylight. They are no longer extorting money from the gas station owner of a small town in Calabria. No, these guys are buying shares of Gazprom, Shell, Chevron. However, we'll leave those arguments for another video and discuss the current role of 'Ndrangheta in the world. But hopefully, that has given you an idea of what 'Ndrangheta was and just how powerful it is right now. And we'll post further videos soon on other characters and other crime syndicates. But in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if so, please do give it a thumbs up. Let's have your views in the comments section below. We do love to read about them. And of course, please do subscribe to the channel. And we'll see you soon with more videos. We'll see you next time.